Welcome to the Brotherhood Remnant Podcast, hosted by Tim Yarborough and me, Rob Carr. In this episode, we will be talking with Russell Griffin, known to his colleagues as Rusty, a member of the Brotherhood Commission staff in the early 1980s until the Brotherhood Commission closed in 1997.
Welcome again to another edition of the Brotherhood Remnant Podcast. I'm Tim Yarborough, and I have with me my co-host, Rob Carr, who we call affectionately our resident Brotherhood expert. How are you tonight, Rob?
I'm doing well. Thank you, Tim. And I'm really looking forward to this podcast.
Well, I'll tell you what, we have a special guest with us tonight, and I'm so excited to talk to him. I guess you could say that is one of the historic figures in Brotherhood work. And he did a lot for Brotherhood. He grew up around Brotherhood, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. And let's welcome Rusty to the podcast. Hello, Rusty.
Hey, how you
Rusty?
guys?
How
Rusty,
are you doing?
he called you historic. Does that mean you're old?
Really old.
Before we put you on, I called you a historic Brotherhood figure. Is that okay?
That's almost dead, is what you're saying.
No.
You are extinguished means you're out of here.
Yeah, right. In the grave. Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, I was an RA, and of course, Rob was an RA, but you were a special type of RA. And we want to talk a little bit about that tonight as we begin. And then we want to talk a little later about your key role in starting World Changers. We just did a couple of podcasts on World Changers. We had Andy Morris with us. And of course, I was privileged to serve alongside Andy and you in the beginning days of World Changers, at least the national launch phase. I know you were involved with the pilot as well as a lot of others were. And then as we go along here, hopefully we have enough time to talk to you a little bit about what you did post-Brotherhood. So, Rob, why don't you kick us off tonight?
Sure. It's a little bit sounding like Bob Edwards' This Is Your Life, Rusty. We're not going to go that far. We're not going back to your birth or anything, but we're going to show a picture of one of the earliest displays of Rusty in Royal Ambassador work that showed up in the Ambassador Leader in 1966, as you see it there. A very good-looking, fine-looking young man, I believe, who was in high school at the time. And I just wanted to take a minute to read the inside cover of this magazine. And then, Rusty, I want to just turn you loose to say, just kind of summarize the steps between your experience in RAs to the time you came to the Brotherhood Commission. But this is what the inside leader said. It says this: is Rusty Griffin of First Baptist Memphis, Tennessee, a winner? We think so. As far as we know, he is the first RA to complete 3 service aid projects: camp counselor, religious education, and youth director. That represents 450 hours of work. Man, know anyone who can top this record? And I'm sure there's more to that, Rusty, but I just want to say, to get into a magazine like that is kind of special. And so let me just give it to you. Between that and the time you got to the commission, what were some of your steps, experiences that you had?
I think the most important thing is not that it's about me. It's about a man, a leader, and his commitment to work with boys and his investment in me. A guy named Bob Dixon, who invested in a kid who got kicked off a basketball team as a sophomore in high school for being a jerk, not coming to practice, not paying attention, not being disciplined, just to goof off, whose mother and dad went to a youth minister and said, "Can you help my son get his life back straightened out?" And Bob Dixon was my youth minister and said, sure, I need a challenge. It was a challenge. Bob was at that point was probably 5'4". I was 6'4", and that's probably not the only thing we didn't have in common. But Dixon won my confidence and gave me some challenges that I took on, earned my friendship, got me involved in doing things, and little did I know he was counting hours, and got me involved in doing things around our church. I thought I was just helping him as a friend and as a mentor and learning from him and getting involved. It pacified my mother, got her off my case that I was in church and not hanging out with a bunch of thugs at school. And I found myself enjoying what I was doing, and the hours were accumulating, and it was fun, and I was learning. And he started showing me his little book of the hours I was accumulating and said, let me show you what you're working toward. And the hours kept building, and he said, this is where you're headed if you want to go there. And I got more involved in doing things on Wednesday night with him and a group of guys that I got real close to. And a couple of them were about as sorry as I was as a high school student. And all of us kind of got straightened out because of Bob Dixon. About time I became a senior in high school, which was, gosh, that was 66 was the spring of my high school year. And Dixon said, let me show you where you are. And it all kind of accumulated at that point. I had earned a little over 450 hours. And he said, I've talked to your dad, and he's ready to help you design this display. And I want you to go with me to the State Royal Ambassador Congress and display what you've done and help some other guys to see what can be done. And my dad was a good woodworker and helped me to put this display together. And Dixon had been taking pictures all along of the work I'd been doing in camp and around the church and in the children's day camp that we were having at church over the past 2 summers. And he had accumulated all the elements of the display, and my dad helped cut out the letters and the woodworking part of it, and we put it all together. And it was a 5-foot circle of plywood that we painted and attached the Royal Ambassador letters and the logo to. Carried it to the state convention and was named Royal Ambassador of the Year for the state of Tennessee. And Dixon said, well, you're really not through. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, I've been counting, and since you finished accumulating those hours in the last 4 months, you've earned another 150 hours, but they won't give you another credit for another service aid project. So we'll just keep counting. And so that summer earned some more hours and stuff. And I ended up, by the time I graduated from high school and went off to college, I had 700 and something hours. But by the time I left for college, I realized with Dixon's help and his guidance that before he left to go to Texas to become the Royal Ambassador Director for the state of Texas, that God had been speaking to me through all that process, and that there was a real calling in the midst of all of that, and that he had used all of that and used Bob Dixon and his commitment to me and to the cause of Christ and in my life, to help me understand that I needed to use the talents that I had to lead other young people. And went to Mississippi College to study to become a youth director. And I thought that was kind of my life's calling, and it wasn't. I went to seminary after that, spent 5 years as a youth minister, and then went to Mississippi Baptist Convention as the Royal Ambassador Director for the state. And after 5 years there, came to the Brotherhood Commission, spent 18 years there before it closed, and then did other and assorted stuff after that.
So let me get this straight. You were mentored by literally a legend in Brotherhood work.
Yeah, he kind of became well known in Brotherhood circles, but he started off as just my lowly youth minister, working with a bunch of thugs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Rusty, a quick question for you, because this is, a tremendous story, but with me and my interest in archives, does anybody know what happened to that 5-foot plaque of Royal Ambassador? Do you know what happened to that?
The last time I saw it, it was up in the storage room, in the gymnasium, in the recreation building at First Baptist Church. I'd taken several girls up there to look at it over the years, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, I would say so. Now, Rusty, look, put that shield back up there, because I want y'all to take a look at this, and I'm not even sure you saw. Rusty, what blows me away is, of course, we knew the RA emblem even at that time had a scalloped edge, but you're forward thinking, or your dad just couldn't cut out a scallop. You made that a round symbol, which we all know that later on, the patch was round, and then eventually we went to just a round. We dropped the whole scallop thing. So once again, I'd say you all were forward thinking in this pattern, but I had never noticed that scallop wasn't there until just a few minutes ago when I looked at it.
I think my dad had his limits of how far he was willing to go for me to put something in the car and drive it to Jackson, Tennessee. So,
Yeah.
But
it's amazing piece.
5 feet was about his limit. So that was.
So how did Brotherhood find out about this? Did Bob let them know about it?
That's where another person comes involved in it. Norman Godfrey was a member of First Baptist Church, and he kind of sat back and laughed. He and my dad were good friends. Mm-hmm. So, he knew about it, and I think he kind of tracked my ups and downs of life, and he was probably instrumental in getting all of that put together.
Yeah,
I know this is again a little bit on the trivial side. I'm curious, Rusty, with your coming to the commission, and I know you, and we'll get to that, where we started developing, or you all started developing the Service 8 awards and things like that, and you got up to 750 you calculated in your personal walk. Did that have anything to do with the 5th Service 8 award, which was, I think, 750 hours, I think, if my memory holds?
There were a lot of other employees at the Brotherhood Commission who always bragged about having more. The little short, fat guy that worked with me, who always challenged it, but he never proved it.
Okay.
Raines always talked about, well, I did this and I did that. I said, prove it. Show me a magazine. Here, show me the magazine, buddy.
You didn't make the cover.
Prove it. Yeah.
Okay. But seriously, I was impressed, because when you said that about your own personal journey up to 750 hours, I thought, well, maybe that's what led it to become that as a standard, the highest standard that, person. That's a lot of hours when you think about it.
It's a lot. Yeah. But the story is not about, it's really not me. It's
right.
Yeah. I've tried to tell, every time I did a conference, I told part of that story, but I told the Dixon part of the story. If it hadn't been for the leader,
yes,
it never would have happened. That's it takes the men part of the story more than the boy.
I absolutely agree.
I still, till the day he died, and I told him probably the week before he died in a nursing home in Texas, man, I'd have jumped off buildings for you. So I owed him a lot.
And this is something I'm sure if you listen to any of our podcasts, Rob and I have touched on. That's what we're so sorely missing today. This aspect of church work, I think. I mean, there is mentoring that goes on, but role ambassador work, brotherhood work made it very intentional.
We're going to move on, but I was going to say to copy what you just said, Rusty. I think anybody who's been involved in Royal Ambassadors and who have gone just beyond the program itself, I think it's due to the fact that there was an interested man. I had one, I'm sure Tim did, whether it was a father figure or in my case, it was Robert Phelps and Gene Holly that worked with me throughout my RA time that kept me focused on that, because it's easy to get out of church work. And the last podcast we did on SMAY, we talked about that, how do we bring youth back into the fold of the church, because the late 60s, early 70s, kids were dropping out. They just didn't see church as relevant. And so you all were, and as a product of that, and we were too, trying to figure out what do we do to get young people back into the life of the church and back on mission and doing missions as well as studying.
It's not about the material. It's not about what you put on the page. Some of our best writers historically for RA material were women, particularly with the younger boys. I never shied away from using women in writing material, even with high schoolers on occasion. But without a male leader, RAs would not have climbed to the level it did.
Yes.
There's something about a man taking interest in boys, whatever the age, as a high schooler or as an 8th grader or a 1st grader. They're able to speak and lead in ways that women, even WMU as an organization, would never be able to do it. And I'm not apologetic about that at all. I never will be.
Yeah.
Part of the success of World Changers was the crew chief and the fact that that man was standing there in most cases and leading a group of high schoolers in an activity. And that identity was a key element in the success.
His role was defined through the program, through the way it was built. And, you have this role at the projects. Okay, let's move on to that. Since you mentioned World Changers, I don't want to miss this in this podcast, because that's one of the reasons we wanted to have you on. You played a key role, because I was there and I saw it. You played a key role in making sure that World Changers happened, which you said you watched the podcast that we did with Andy. World Changers truly revolutionized student missions in Southern Baptist life. Now, it was out there, group work camps and all that was going on. But then, anything that Southern Baptists decide to do is going to be becomes a big thing. And you made it happen. And I know that we had a lot of meetings with WMU. We were talking through a lot of aspects of doing something like this. We tried to get WMU kind of be a co-partner with it and everything. Could you kind of speak to the early days of the formation of World Changers? And I know there were a lot of different people that were involved. And I know Mike Day and a lot of other people, if you want to kind of talk a little bit about that too.
The idea came about because we had tried, as far as I was concerned, every avenue, every direction we could to enhance, to alter, to massage high school Baptist young men, which was Pioneer Royal Ambassadors before, for high schoolers. And and we just could not break the trend or influence the trend of churches hiring part-time, full-time youth ministers or even volunteer youth ministers that felt like what they were doing had to reach co-ed. And even as a youth minister myself, in previous days, I knew the hierarchy of reaching high schoolers. If I couldn't get high school guys involved, I wasn't going to get high school girls involved. I wasn't going to get junior high boys involved. And junior high girls had crushes on high school guys, and I wasn't going to get them involved. So I was beating my head against the wall to try and come up with a way to crack into high schoolers. And culture dictated as much as anything else how we were going to be successful doing missions education with high schoolers for the foreseeable future back in the late 90s. Luckily enough, and by maybe not luck, but just God's providence, the Brotherhood director in California told me about his son-in-law who was doing a pastor, a part-time pastor, who was doing his doctoral work on co-ed missions at Golden Gate Seminary Extension in Los Angeles. And he came up with the name of World Changers. And that's where it started. And I know a lot of people have taken credit for that name. That's where it started. And I know how much I paid for it. You know, when I turned in the bill to Jack Childs, I'm buying this name of World Changer and his doctoral thesis for $1,000. Jack said, "Why do we have to buy a name? Can't we come up with a name?" And I said, "Nope, he already has, and it's what we need to use." And I don't think Jack ever fussed again because it paid for itself.
So how soon after that did you have it trademarked? I know you had it trademarked, right?
I think Jack got it pretty quick because World Overcomers Church was out on Winchester, and there was a World Changer Church in Atlanta.
In Atlanta, yes.
So we jumped pretty quick to.
Well, and I remember, and maybe I'm not remembering this correctly, but we couldn't trademark the World Changers itself, but we had to trademark the actual logo type, right?
Right. We did the artwork and stuff that I think Mary Moore did it. With
the world and the O.
I was going to ask Rusty, our last podcast, and I'm curious about my commenting on, and I did use the term, and Tim pushed back on it because I said before World Changers there was SMAY, Summer Mission Activities for Youth. And Rusty, I'd like your thoughts, opinions, or your own pushing back, because I felt like that the commission had begun to look at co-ed missions in some form or fashion in the early 70s, but it was more of a find your own niche and just do it on your own, whereas World Changers was more organizational, which is needed from a state, local, church, all the way up. Did SMAY have any influence on you? You were probably a little bit aware of it. I know it didn't get a lot of traction. We didn't talk much about it. I remember very little about it, but I was just curious on your point of view.
Rob, I'm 77 years old, so my memory's fuzzy. But as best I can recall, there was a lack of intestinal fortitude about pushing SMAY hard enough to get it to the point of reality and acceptance. And every time there was a little pushback from anybody, we said, "Oh, we're sorry. We didn't mean to offend anybody."
No, that's right.
Birmingham or Nashville or anybody, we won't use that word again. And that was a wrong acronym to use. And we'll wimp out on you. So I'm not much on wimping out, and
If it had much influence, or if it was just it kind of came and went in its time, and really, like I said, and I agree, it never did really get much traction.
it didn't. But I think it was a feeble attempt and well-meaning, but it lacked a gutsy, wholehearted.
Yeah.
We're gonna do it come heck or high water.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah,
Okay.
it was back to that words on a page thing you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of not wimping out, I remember specifically a meeting at in Birmingham, I believe it was, with WMU, where they pushed back on the concept of world changers, and one WMU leader in particular pushed back from the table and said, "Well, you're trying to steal our girls." And after that meeting, Rusty said, "You know what, guys? We're going to do this." And with or without them, I think was the way you said that. I can't remember exactly.
There were a few more words in that sentence, I think.
I never believed that the WMU owned anybody. That's what's amazing to me, that it's kind of like an open field. You get them,
well, they were offered, weren't they, Rusty, to be full partners, because that was what our organization, Brotherhood, was wanting us to do, you to do.
Well, that was our former boss, former boss.
Yeah.
Jim Smith said, we're going to have to offer them 50% of this. And no. How about 20? And we went round and around about that. But, it's funny now to look back on it. They never said, you can't do this in the beginning. They said, the statement I remember being repeated over and over again: mothers are not going to let their little girls climb on the roof of houses. And they used that till it just wore out. And I sent Delano O'Brien a picture of about 6 or 7 girls climbing on the roof, and they were dirty. The coal coming off those coal stoves up the chimneys landed on the roof of those houses, the tin houses, and you climb on one of those roofs. God, you got so nasty. It was terrible. And I sent her a picture of about 5 or 6 girls that obviously had slid up and down one of those roofs. And I didn't put a caption. I didn't say anything. I just sent her the picture. And I wanted to say, ha, 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 look at this, yeah. And Mike took some really good pictures of girls and guys too. That I remember one from St. Louis where they had been in a warehouse. A church was taking over a warehouse in downtown St. Louis, and they had all had goggles on because the soot was so bad up in that warehouse. And that was the only white thing they had left on them. And it was just nasty, And I said, send that to WMU. They need a cover picture.
Rusty, I'm thinking in terms of the entry point for the whole discussion. Maybe it started with World Changers, again, your point of view, because WMU and Brotherhood were not only talking about co-ed missions, they were talking about lay missionaries versus full-time missionaries, mission action, what in the definition of mission versus missions. I mean, I know you remember all those little nuanced details that seemed to be, we were running up against trying to expand the whole concept of what mission education and what missions was. And again, I'm not knocking where people have been, but I think when you see that WMU was trying to keep the role of missionary where it was, and then we were saying, but we got all these lay missionaries out here, or we got laymen that can be on mission. I may not be getting that completely right, but am I on the right track with that was all kind of accumulating together?
Yeah, totally. WMU still says in a lot of their work, our job is to support the work of the boards. And the boards will say our job is to send missionaries. and they don't say career, they just say missionaries. But that takes out volunteerism completely. Now, they will say we welcome volunteers, but they don't use the word missionaries and volunteers in the same sentence. So that always was a sticking point in meetings when we talked about our publications promoting volunteerism, because their publications didn't. And it softened a little bit, I think, in the late 80s, early 90s, but not to the point where they never got to our point of promoting volunteerism. I think that was always a friction. And sadly, this is the third point of where we're headed, but even as a master's missionary where I wasn't really a missionary in the minds of a lot of folks, a lot of career people. I mean, I had the job of 3 career people when I was there, but they wanted to distinguish, you're not real, you're just here. I said, I'm just here doing what 3 of you were supposed to do. Now, if that's career, maybe I need to give 2 jobs back and get paid more. So that's just part of the tension, and sadly, I'm afraid, and I've never been one to shut my mouth when I should, but the problem is if 5,000 career people are going to win the world, they better get on the stick.
They better work a little harder.
It just is not going to happen.
Right.
And
you're right, Rusty. Before we move on, I want to go back to World Changers just a second. And I know that during the launch year, I know there was the pilot, which a lot of different people had a hand in. I know you were. I guess everyone who assisted came out of your division at the Brotherhood. Mike Day was, I think they called him special projects person. I can't remember what his title was, but he kind of took that on that year. And I know Tim Sainer was involved. Tim Bearden, I think, was involved. There were several. You might want to name some others, but real quickly, as you do that, address a little bit about the pushback that we had when we launched World Changers nationally the first year with the 6 projects. I know we had trouble, in Los Angeles. We couldn't get the director of missions to allow us to come in his association, and we had to end up doing it out in, I think, Orange County with Dole Braden, I believe it was. So can you address a little bit of that pushback? It was such a new concept that we didn't have total buy-in in the beginning of a lot of our old rank and file Brotherhood folks and associational folks.
Yeah. Talk about Mike first. Mike left right before, he left when we started talking about the pilot project. It had nothing to do with the pilot project. My pastor and his pastor convinced him that he needed to be a minister of education again at First Baptist Church of Memphis. I think Mike was tired of being an editor of a magazine, which I don't blame him. I never wanted to be one either. So you probably didn't either. But,
No.
Mike left and went to First Baptist Memphis and stayed 3 months, I think, through one retreat, and said, I knew I made a mistake. I'm ready to come back. So he came back, and everybody knew he didn't want to be an editor. So his new job when he came back was special projects, and we were I think we had just had it approved to do the pilot project.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike came back and did the curriculum, the 10 sessions curriculum. I believe it was what we had in the
Yeah.
initial pilot project. Took a lot of material that we all had kind of sitting around, put it in high school format that a youth minister could take, who it was all new to them too. But it worked in a Wednesday night kind of format, in a youth group kind of format, and did a great job of putting it together. Mike came out of the youth minister background, so he knew what would work and how to make it work. And then the last session was to do a local project, and had a bunch of ideas in print for a youth minister who probably 90% of them probably had never been on a mission trip, never done a local project, to give them some ideas to do a local project. And then Mike is more gregarious than I am, certainly. And so Mike was the front man for the pilot project and did a great job at that. I'm more construction oriented and more task oriented. So I did construction coordination for the pilot project, and worked with the guys who became construction coordinators, project coordinators for the 6 projects we had, 6 houses we worked on in Bryceville. So it was just a natural, because Mike had overseen that, and that Mike became the special projects guy who did those and worked into being the overseer of that. I've got one picture. Maybe you can see this. This is the first summer staff.
Mm-hmm.
When we took on the 6 projects, that's when we had to hire a summer staff, rent a couple of vans, and buy a couple of trailers. Again, when Jack Childs had a fit, why are we buying vans? Why are we buying trailers, ice chests, all that? So he kind of understood and went along with it. But that's the first summer staff that we put together, and that's what made it work. So that was made it happen.
That's special.
Let me check. That was the year we went to 12 projects, because the first year it was basically just me and Andy.
Was that right? Was that how we went to 12?
Yeah, the first year you told us we're doing 6 projects, and you just kind of got mad.
I ask y'all as a fine gentleman and brothers to please help us do.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but anyway, we were trying to figure out how we were going to pull that off, and being 30 years old and young and stupid, we thought we could do that. Andy's a little older than me, but I think that was after we got done the first year. Andy walked into your office, and if I remember correctly, I wasn't there, but he recounted it. He says, "I can't do this again." And that was the first, I think, the 12 projects. He can correct us. I think that was when the summer team, summer teams were organized, which had to happen if it was going to expand.
Yeah.
Now let's talk a little bit about how we had pushback. I know you were involved in some of that.
The pushback, what I said all along was, we've got to have an exit strategy. I think I sold it to the trustees of, let us do a pilot. And when the time we got to the fall trustee meeting, I said, we've got an exit strategy if you tell us we got to quit after 1. And of course, Jim Smith had come up there for the pilot. He was all fired up. This is going to work. This is great. Delano was off his case at that point. Marty, the girl who did GA Act Teens, had been there for a day. I don't know what she went back and said, but they were off our case about it at WMU. The youth ministers were all fired up. We had kind of prodded them to tell Dr. Smith, this is wonderful. We're on board. We're going to tell everybody about it, So, he was fired up. A couple of trustees had been there to the pilot. They were excited about it. They saw how excited the youth ministers were. The kids were excited. The work was getting done. It was great. They saw the Friday night worship time and the decisions that were being made. So, when I said, we've got an exit strategy for getting out of this, and they all said, no, let's go ahead. This is great. Well, I also had, on the side over there, a map of the U.S. with lights on it that showed, well, if you want to go ahead, here are the 6 places we're ready to go to. And the lights came on the 6 spots on the map that, we've got commitment from these 6 DOMs that we can go to their state, their associations next. And, we're ready to go. So I kind of hedged a little bit. I was kind of playing my cards, but at the same time, I was ready to back off and not do it. And I guess I was fine either way. If we said we'd do 1 and quit, I was okay. If they wanted to go to 6, I was okay. But I said, if we go to 6, we got to hire somebody to do it, because Tim Sainer was a photographer. Bearden did video. Raines did logistics for us with his neighborhood people up there in Bryceville. And I said, I pulled people and double timed all these people. They got real jobs at the Brother Commission. We can't do it like this. So they said, fine, it pays for itself. We're making money, do it. So that's, Andy came on board. You got moved over. Things happened. So we were ready to move forward. So
Rusty, we know it takes 3 to 5 years to say hello to Baptist. And I'm wondering, in your opinion, after the first and second, third, fourth project, when did World Changers start to develop its own sense of direction, where you weren't having to go in and literally say, okay, this is what World Changers means? I mean, you had the equipment, you had the videos, you had the stuff. What would you say, 3-4 years did it take to catch on the level that it finally did?
Rob, I'm not being arrogant about it, but if you got something that makes money, the accountants will get on board real quick.
Real quick, okay.
If you got something that shows success, tangible success to a youth minister, they get on board real quick, because they're not going to be there but 2 or 3 years. So they want something that's going to make it quick. So they'll be a success. And we produced a video quickly that showed them, this is hot. This will make it, you'll be a hot commodity, and don't look back. And they were knocking on the door, Tim, right?
That's right.
And those 6 projects filled up in just a matter of weeks.
Absolutely. I found that video, that first promo video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got them all in my closet upstairs.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing I was going to add to that, Rusty, because obviously the churches were on board, youth pastors were on board, the youth were on board, associations were getting there. They're a little slow sometimes, but that's okay. But I think what impressed me, because I actually went to one of the World Changers pre-project designs up in Chicago when I was Brotherhood director up there. And again, I'd like your opinion or comment on that. When the mayors of the town or the cities get on board, that's got to be huge.
Rob, the thing was, we were lucky, or God took care of us, whichever way you want to see it. But when you're lucky in Savannah, Georgia, and the Catholic mayor says, let me tell you, I will tell anybody, anywhere, any mayor, this is the best thing that's ever happened in my town. You want me to put it on tape? You want me to go somewhere and tell them? And you get a couple of mayors like that are respected. We just said, here, call this guy. Don't listen to me. Don't listen to the fat boy over there. Don't listen to Andy. Just call this mayor. Let him tell you what we did in his town. Nobody died. Nobody fell through the roof. Nobody got hurt. Did we do everything we said we were going to do? Did you make money on the deal because you saved so much money that you still have money in your pocket when you got through with your community development funds, and you got more projects done than you ever would have done in a whole year in 1 week?
It made them look good. Yeah.
You can get reelected real quick.
That's right. That's right.
How about that? It paid for itself. It did its own publicity.
And again, I'm not trying to knock it, but I just find it ironic that the mayors sometimes got on board quicker than some of our own folks.
Yeah, the DOMs are the slowest people in the world to get motivated. Yeah.
You say that, Rusty.
Who created those people?
But it's fair. It's a fair statement. It's a fair statement.
Yeah.
But anyway,
Baptists sometimes have to be drug kicking and screaming to something new. And that's kind of what World Changers became. And then all of a sudden, everybody wanted a piece of it.
Yeah.
We
couldn't multiply them fast enough.
Works. Now, Rusty, we got about 15 minutes left, and I don't want to get away from here without you talking a little bit about your post-Brotherhood time. And Rob, I don't know if you have any specific questions you want to ask Rusty, but I think he did some very, very significant work post-Brotherhood.
Gosh, that's when I got to put into practice everything I had talked about for all those years, for 20 years. First of all, I started off helping 2 career missionaries who were medical doctors form an organization called Medical Missions Response. They were kind of renegades, both of them, and they wanted to recruit medical volunteers to go on short-term projects into closed countries or limited access countries. One of them lived in North Africa, Central Asia. The other one lived in China, Southeast Asia. And their job was to design projects and work with local people there in those 2 parts of the world. My job was to recruit volunteers from the States, get them with orientation on the state side, get them together enough, put together the trip, and get them to a jumping point somewhere close to where they were going to enter the closed country. And then the missionary guy on the other side would take control. He would bring together some ground people who would be their guides, and they would do some orientation there. And then they would take them in country, and they would stay for 10 to 14 days doing medical clinics and working under sometimes very open conditions, sometimes very closed conditions, sometimes hostile conditions, but they would be working there with nationals, sometimes no believers, sometimes secret believers, but they would be working in those closed areas. We'd bring them back out to the entry point, debrief them. Then I would be part of the debriefing and evaluation. And then I'd learn from that and use that in recruiting and planning the next project going back in. And that was super. That was volunteers, that was lay people, but it was in places that were hard to get to, that we had limited access to from career people, almost no access for career people because they didn't have the skills to get in. They wouldn't let them in. So it was super experience. I went on a couple of trips every year. One of the trips that I went on was to Peshawar, Pakistan. Actually, it was north of Peshawar, Pakistan, which is not a neat place to go to. I'll tell you that right now. I don't want to go back. I went there with a medical team. We were working with Afghan refugees who had escaped Afghanistan because of the war. This was in 2001, in the spring of 2001. We were working with folks. They were pretty much confined to a dried up riverbed, place called Jalazai. The United Nations had said it was the worst humanitarian crisis of that period of time. I'm not sure how long a period of time they were evaluating it. Pretty bad place. They were in a fenced-in area of about 5 acres, I would guess, something like that. The Pakistanis had confined them into that area, and we were there to do medical care for those folks. Pretty tough spot. The men, the Afghan men, I learned a lot about culture, but the men kind of beat them, children and women, into submission. So they would line up, but they were always in the back of the line, so the men could go first to get their medical needs taken care of, made sure they got everything they wanted first. Then they would usher the women and children in first. The male children came first. Then the women came next, and the female children came last, was the way that they had them organized. So it was a tough deal. And they would riot every once in a while if they didn't like what somebody said or didn't like the answers we gave. Not real pretty situation. One day I was having lunch with the guards there, the Pakistani guards who were paid to oversee the compound there. One of the guys there spoke a little English, not much. The rest of the Pakistani guards spoke no English. But one of the Pakistani guards who spoke English said, "Do you know who that man is in that picture up on the wall there?" Only picture on the wall. I couldn't miss it. And bearded guy. And I said, "No, I'm sorry. I was looking around to see if it was the picture of one of the other guys. I was hoping somebody there I would recognize." Mm-hmm. I said, "No, I'm sorry. You know, it's the first time I've ever been to Pakistan. I don't know anything about your country, and I don't recognize him. Is he a national officer, a politician, the president?" I was trying to guess. And he said, "Oh, no, he's not from around here, but he's famous." And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this part of the world that much, and I don't know." He said, "Oh, you will. You know, someday you'll know, and someday everybody will know. The whole world will know." And I said, "Well, who is it?" He said, "His name is Osama bin Laden." And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't know who Osama bin Laden is." And that was the end of the conversation. We went back to eating soup and flatbread and rice, and that was the end of the conversation. That was Wednesday of our week there in Peshawar. On Friday of that week, we had a fellowship dinner with the sending organization, the group of Westerners, a couple of Americans, a lot of Europeans, a group that was called Shelter Now. And they kind of helped us with logistics in that part of the world. And they were there doing projects. They were doing a well drilling project there. They were doing some relief work. They were a small group, but they were there. And the guy who was leading that group got a phone call while we were having dinner. They always had a pizza dinner on Friday night, and it was a prayer time for them. But the guy who was there leading them got a phone call, and he said, "Let me go." And he got on the phone, and you could tell he was kind of yelling back and forth on the phone. You could hear his side of the conversation, and he was yelling at the people on the other end, "I don't understand, and tell me what really happened." And explain more and who's involved and all this. He got off the phone and, he was really upset and red faced. And he came back over and he said, I've got some really bad news. Our team in Kabul, Afghanistan, has been taken by the Taliban. And he said, I'm sorry that I can't really explain to our guest here. And I was one of the guests. Our whole team was guests. He said, but I can tell you briefly, we have a team in Kabul who are doing the same kind of work. We operate a bakery there as part of our ministry there. They do several different projects around the city of Kabul, but we just had our bakery taken over by the Taliban, and 8 of our foreigners, our Westerners, were kidnapped, and 16 of our Afghan workers were kidnapped. And we need to cut our meeting short tonight and just have a team meeting and figure out what our strategy is and what we're going to do. But we're going to get y'all back to your hotel. And that was it. I went by the next morning. That was on Friday. We were supposed to leave on Saturday night. Went back on Saturday morning. We were doing a little shopping before we left in Peshawar. And I went back over to his house and talked to him a little bit. And what can I do to help? How can I help back in the States? And he said, I think it's best. We had 3 more teams scheduled to come. I said, I've already canceled 2 teams, but 1 team is already in the air coming to replace us. So I said, if you can spare 1 national to help them, I understand, but we'll cancel the other 2. And he said, that's great. We'll take care of that. But I said, what can you tell me about your team? And he said, well, 2 of the team members were from the U.S. They're from Texas. And I didn't think much about it. I didn't know anything. Well, he came back home, and several weeks later, 9/11 happens. And the same picture that I had seen on the wall of that shack in Jalazai in the riverbed was the same picture that was on the television in my house of Osama bin Laden. May have been the only picture anybody had of him. But he was right. The guard that I met was right. Everybody knew who he was. Wow. And that started a series of events that I got involved with Afghanistan. Wow. And I spent time going back and forth for the next 3 years to Afghanistan. Our church, Germantown Baptist, got involved with Afghanistan. And we worked with them, and my wife and I went back and forth to Afghanistan, and we had projects there up until the time that the U.S. troop pulled out last year, almost 10 years.
I remember knowing about your work over there and praying for you during that time, because I had, been talking to different Brotherhood folks who would tell me what you were doing, and it sounded to me like a very dangerous situation. Okay, we need to wrap up. Rob, you have some last words for us, or anything you want to ask Russ?
By the way, I also appreciated, which we don't have a copy of, the article from Stand Firm, which you were in, that kind of explains some of the things you were doing, and we'll find that and put that in the Brotherhood archives for other people to know that.
Rob, I just wanted one comment about that. Yeah. I saw that article on a Cessna Caravan, a little single-engine airplane in Sumatra, Indonesia. The pilot of that airplane, who was a United Airlines pilot flying volunteer for Mission Aviation Fellowship, pulled that out of the pocket of the airplane and said, "Here, you might want to read this. It's about some idiot from Memphis, Tennessee."
Wow.
And I said, "You want me to
Did you acknowledge who that idiot was? Did you acknowledge who the idiot was?"
I said, "Where did you get that?" And he said, "Oh, I get this all the time. I brought it with me."
I'm sure. Well, Rusty, just one more thing. And again, we want to appreciate and thank you for being with us today. This came from 1994. I believe you recognize the name Jerry Michael. I think did I do that right? Is that how you pronounce his last name?
Dr. Michaels.
He was from Memphis State University, and he did a piece which is will be on the Brotherhood archives. I'm going to put that on there soon, called "Contemporary Change and Some Possible Brotherhood Responses," and there's about 6 of them that he listed, but the last one caught my attention, and it may say everything, or you're welcome to add to it or share your comments. But this is what he says, and I quote, "Because of the 1979 to 1991 struggle, the SBC has lost the momentum it had. It cannot realize its current full potential unless and until there is reconciliation based on mutual respect. Reconciliation begins in the heart." This was in 1994, and there were struggling going on. We all know that, and y'all were still trying to be the Brotherhood Commission up until the very end. Of course, we know more now than we did back then. Was he on? Do you think he was on track?
Yeah, I do, and I think some people. I wish I could say I had enough foresight to realize that we were doomed somewhere in the early 90s. The tide had already turned in the convention, and World Changers was a success, but it was temporary. And by the time we folded, going to Atlanta was not the salvation for World Changers or anything else in volunteerism. The decline had already started, and they were not going to let anything related to lay leadership survive. And it will, I'm not sure in my lifetime, which is not much longer, I don't think, there will not be a resurgence. I don't think that lay people are so diffused around the world now, around the U.S. particularly, even in Memphis. The people who were excited in the 80s have either dropped out of organized religion, or they are so diffused in churches in such small groups and have gotten tired of fighting. There will never be a rising up of lay people to anywhere compare with what was going on. I think, Tim, you may disagree with this part. Lay renewal was part of the undoing. There were some good parts of it, but that was the most threatening thing that pastors saw. I mean, one pastor that I owe a lot to, I have much respect for, said, "I don't want my deacons away from church on Sunday, and I need them here to support me." And I owe him a lot. He taught me a lot, but that mentality was far beyond him. And that kind of attitude kills volunteerism. If men can't get out and be evangelistic and be ministers because they got to be back for Sunday morning to support the local church, the pastor, we'll never make a difference in this world. And
very true.
Rob and I,
the insecurity of pastors is going to kill it.
Rob and I have talked about that. I just basically said it out loud. But conservative resurgence and the rise of the pastor, senior pastor, just helped kill the layman's movement. And not that they don't want laymen, but they want laymen. They don't want them empowered. They want them to be under whatever role they want them to play in the church. And we're going to have to end this thing. Rob, you have anything else you want to say?
Well, just again, we want people to continue to subscribe. We have this on YouTube. We're putting together a group for Facebook, and so we hope you'll do that. And if you have any questions, comments, responses, you can email us. It's all there at the bottom running through. And we do have these archives available so that as we reference these things, we want to get them out there so that folks can see them. Rusty, we just want to say thank you for your time, your service, being a fellow colleague on different venues of the work, whether we were all together on opposite sides. I think we were all working towards the same purpose. And I think we all can say that we miss it. And we think it has an impact of not being there, the SBC in the direction it's now in. And lay people are very honest. They're going to say, you don't want me, then I'll go do something else.
Yeah. Well, and I think we're going to see a continued growth of Samaritan's Purse and people like that who honor and respect and depend on those people who once were Brotherhood people and people, IMB people who believed in the necessity of having lay people.
Yeah, well, hey, Rusty, again, I echo what Rob said. We appreciate you. We appreciate the work that you did. I don't think we necessarily at the time saw God's hand in a lot of this, but I tell you what, now that in hindsight, as I look back, he was in all of it. And he is the one that we give all the praise and the honor and glory for to make it all happen. And I think we have less than a minute left. Rob, close us out.
Well, Rusty, let me just say this. We hope we can get you back sometime to talk about other topics because you have a variety of experiences, and we're trying to get more of the Brotherhood Commission staff to talk to them. So don't be surprised if we try to get you back sometime.
Sure. Be glad to do it.
Thank you. Tim, thank you for your time, man. And I appreciate your time too. And I'm going to be quiet now and let you sign us off.